Please welcome Academy Award winner Ron Howard.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
So honored that you're here, Ron. Yeah, what a fantastic film.
Thank you.
I want to, yeah, that's my dog.
Oh, is that your dog?
I want to ask you about the cinematography, which I thought you guys made a choice of the camera almost disappears. We feel like we are following the characters and we forget about the camera. And excuse me for butchering his name, Sayombu Mukdipram,
Yeah.
who is, yeah, tell us about the choice.
I mean, you might know his credits better than I do.
Call Me By Your Name.
Right. But also Uncle Booney.
Booney, which won the top prize at Cannes.
You know, which is a really interesting film, but also, you know, filmed in a very different kind of way. You know, when I had a chance to finally talk to Sayombu and connect with him, I had already talked to people who worked with him, who said, you know, fantastic. And I just simply said, first I want you to read this script, because the most important thing to me is going to be to, you know, to try to get the spirit of this right. It needs to be authentic. You know, I am who I am. I've never been to Thailand. And I feel like that, you know, I want you to know how much Thai is going to be spoken, and that there's going to be a lot of improvisation as well. But this is your story, and you're the first Thai person that I will have spoken to about this script. And he called back and he said, you know, he was just very confident about it. And I said, well, does that mean that you'll do it? And he said, come on. And so he was just all in, but he was also, you know, I had deputized him, and he took that role very seriously. But it's interesting that you said that the camera sort of disappeared, because his instinct was that the camera never moves without following an actor. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was a great instinct. And I didn't want to do a faux documentary, but I've been making a lot of documentaries over the last few years.
Like Paradise.
Yeah, and the We Feed People, which is out now, and it's interesting to me, and I've learned a lot about, mostly in the editings, kind of you know, the way you can convey an idea is sometimes is different in a documentary. You don't, because you haven't had a chance to stage a scene to make a point. No one quite said the line of dialogue that you need. And so it's an interesting challenge, and I've learned a lot from that. But also behaviors, by watching people under duress, and seeing the way certain moments where you, of course, didn't have an opportunity to stage it. It happened, and there's where your operator happened to be, you know, and so that's it. That's the scene, and yet the moments really work. And so I'm sort of evolving and shifting from that, and I wanted to, in an unselfconscious way, you know, try to apply some of that. So together, we kind of just came up with this feeling of a very sort of, I wanted it to feel unstaged and very spontaneous and fluid.
But I'm glad you brought up the documentary aspect, because I felt very emotional watching the film because of the details that you give us. There is so much specificity in the film. Can you talk about?
Well, it felt like getting granular was the way that you would have suspense, because everyone would know. Of course, I went through this exercise, and it gave me some confidence going into this film, having made Apollo 13 years ago.
Correct.
Because, you know, that was a circumstance where people, you know, we managed to create suspense, even though people, you know, knew the outcome. And so, you know, from that, I felt like there was a lesson in, you know, us human beings making an investment in characters, and through the details, kind of getting lost in the bigger picture and worrying about the outcome of this particular moment. not how, what's it going to mean to that character? Because what we don't know is who got damaged along the way. We don't know what baggage they're carrying. We don't know what struggle they went through. And that can then sort of become the emotional surprise, the discovery, and it just connects you moment to moment. But it has to be moment to moment, and you have to. It has to be as immersive as it can possibly be. So I'm always looking for those from an acting standpoint through the research. It was a terrific script by William Nicholson, and I appreciated the screenplay more and more as I went along, even on into post-production, because he did such a great job of actually finding a movie narrative within this, because there's so many paths to follow, and the research was, I mean, it's fascinating. Every book you could read, every documentary you could see, you're going to find something new and fascinating and interesting, and it's all, I think it's all great.
But the details were in the script, or it was something that
some were, but
because
most weren't.
Things like the prayers,
well,
that to me,
there was they're praying, but the prayers all came from the actors, because we see, northern Thailand is different. You've been there. And it has its own culture. It has its own dialect. And people from the south don't necessarily fully understand people from the north. I mean, it's like a strong Irish, Scottish brogue. It's like to their ears. Well, so that was an important challenge that I didn't know anything about. But the people that I brought in to adapt translate the screenplay, a Thai writer producer and a young Thai writer director, who were charged with this, and then became much more, and they wound up getting co-producer credit because they were on the set every day, and it was very important. We began to understand that, and I'm still not answering your question about the details, but I'll get back to that.
That's right.
But this is a very important detail that we faced early on, and the question came to me, do you want to worry about the Northern Thai dialect? I said, yeah, we have to, because if somebody came in here and made a movie about some Cajuns, I would know, and it wasn't it wasn't authentic, I'd know. Even if I can't quite understand what a Cajun is saying all the time, I would know that the difference, and so we have to get it right, and it's a very difficult dialect. So that meant we should cast as many people from the north as we could if they were from the north. Now, most of the people, most of the Thai people went from the south, went from Bangkok and elsewhere, and converged to volunteer, or they were in the military or whatever. So the upshot really is that Ploy Patricorn, who plays Boamhom, the mom, is, she's a working actress. She lives in Bangkok, but she's from the north, and she has the northern dialect. So does Kage, the guy who's had the little straw hat, he's also a director, a theater director there. When I realized that was really valuable. So I asked him to help me with improvisations and whatnot, because he's a very creative guy. And he and Ploy came to me about the spirituality and said, it's more than just making offerings. There's in the north, it's a blend of like traditional Buddhism and sort of local animism and other long-standing practices which predate even Buddhism. And they brought all of that, the idea of the bracelets and all of these details. So we were constantly imploring the actors and the key collaborators that we were bringing in to drill down on this. But we were also sitting and looking at the footage. Now, the rescue documentary didn't exist yet. That was being worked on, but there'd been a PBS documentary that was done.
There were 3 films,
and then there was just a lot of news footage, and we were gathering all of this, and I began a practice. I don't know when, maybe on Rush, of putting in the production office and the art department, just TV monitors, with style reels and research reels going constantly, with the sound turned off. I mean, you can always go up and turn the sound on. Sometimes it's just old movies, or bits from old movies, documentaries, news, still photographs, whatever it is. And then I also ask people from the art department, the costume department, and the prop department to collect their favorite images and just make color Xeroxes of them, or if they're color, and just paste them up on the walls and around, and put them up where we can see them, especially heading to the bathrooms and the kitchen, because so people have to see them. Well, these become discussion points for these movies, and this one was so important because we would stop constantly, and with Sayampu or this guy Lek, who came to work for Molly, who's a well-regarded art director in Thailand. He was important. They all were. But we'd stop and say, what is that? Why is that color? And they'd say, well, that's because it's a particular fabric that's used in the tints and whatnot. And we did a lot of actually just importing this stuff, which took forever, just to get those details to be as right as possible. And to the point where, oh, one last thing. Sorry.
No,
wow, this is a hell of a
no.
long answer.
Hey,
So sorry.
It's fascinating.
As we were talking ahead of time, Thai culture is incredibly. It's built around kindness and desire to help.
Compassion,
and there's a lot of grace in the interactions, and particularly with strangers and outsiders. And I really had to say over and over again and find the right ways to keep saying it, that I was not going to be insulted by a criticism of the screenplay. I was not going to be insulted by a criticism of something that was going wrong on the set that day. In fact, I implored them to please help me not fail at getting this right. This is a Thai story. So that was the best I could do, because and they really rose to the occasion, to the point where one day Sayampu was operating a shot, and it was where Vigo and Joel Edgerton are going to talk about the fact that Joel's discovered his dad is ill, and they're at a coffee stand, and Vigo's getting one. And the shot, it's not quite in the movie. We wound up cutting into it a little later, but it started with the guy making the coffee. Well, it was a local Thai guy, but he was an Australian, because we were shooting this in Queensland. And halfway through, Sayampu said, "Oh, we must stop. We must stop. What is it? We don't make the coffee this way." And so we took 10 minutes and taught this guy how to make the coffee the way Sayampu said he should, and it was absolutely the right thing to do, even though the shot didn't quite make it in. But we just had to engage in this practice, and it was I think it was important. I think they began to see that it really mattered to us all. Great days, of course, were the spiritual days, because that was very moving.
Follow-up question. The fact that any other American production that comes in and is telling the story would not have given equal time to the Thai culture, the Thai people, and you do in this film. Your crew is from Thailand. You hired your DP from Thailand, actors from Thailand, and then in the script, you give equal measure to the Thai people. Can you talk about the importance of having that authenticity and the veracity in the storytelling?
Well, it's vitally important, and I think it's an expectation. I think it's a demand now. I think that I expect it of myself, but I would expect it of any film or TV show that I was watching, especially if it's based on real events, and so to me, we just had to be very dutiful and dedicated to this idea. But I also know, even going back to Apollo 13, that audiences kind of rise to the occasion when there's this kind of procedural. That becomes part of the entertainment value. And if it rings true, they don't have to be experts. They'll just sense it. They've seen enough, they've read enough, and more. We just kind of can smell it, I feel. And it wasn't, and certainly I want the film to resonate in that way, and I hope it does. And we've worked hard in that way. I've worked just enough in languages I don't speak to begin to trust that if you are really thorough about the process, that you can do it and not get burned. The Dan Brown movies offered a lot of those situations, whether it was Italian or French or German. Rush had a fair amount of German being spoken. I had in The Missing a lot of Chiricahua Apache language, and we had some elders who were helping us through that. And so it's something that I've learned to do. I made a tremendous mistake as a young director doing a movie called Gung Ho. Now, the movie was it was a comedy, and it was about a Japanese car making company coming in and taking over an American plant that was going under and trying to institute Japanese methodology and culture. And so it was a culture clash comedy starring Michael Keaton and Getty Watanabe. And I didn't have a consultant. I cast a couple of Japanese actors, Getty and a couple of other guys, and their audition and so forth, they were speaking Japanese. And I was very excited about that. And then we continued shooting, and I was, very content with what was going on. There wasn't that much Japanese being spoken, but there was some. And then we had a scene. We were actually shooting this in Argentina, where the big boss comes in, and we cast this actor who was an actor-director, So Yamamura was his name. He was like 75 years old, big man, and well regarded, and he came in, and he said, "May I speak to you?" And I said, "Sure." He'd been shooting for about a day or so. He said, "The Japanese, it's not really Japanese." And I realized I had to cut the whole movie together, and I realized the Japanese was lousy. That I trusted these actors, and it was that kind of thing about, can you ride a horse? And yeah, like the wind. Well, fool me once. What is the expression? So I don't want to be fooled twice. And since in the years since, I've tried to be, very thorough.
When I was watching this film, I was so emotional because the past few years we've been so angry and so disconnected, and it's all been about individualism. And in the story, it struck me that it's all about this world that we're all connected and that we're all working together. We should all be working together. Can you tell us about the appeal of the story for you?
Well, we got trapped in COVID, but even pre-COVID, we were all feeling this. And I mean, all the actors, this is what they appealed to them about the story. And look, it's, this happened. This is irrefutable. The world came together and made a miracle happen. And so this is why you take on and dramatize a true story, because it proves the possibility of this kind of an outcome, and and I hope it puts a very human face on the process, and to some extent warts and all, so that we're not idealizing it in any way. They all felt lucky. None of the real people there expected, that level of success. They just couldn't not try, and that commitment was incredibly infectious. It was made possible by the Thai government, that never took their foot off the gas, never stopped really calling the shots in terms of what, which strategies they would ultimately use, et cetera. But also opening it up to the world, which, is, is laudable. And it's not very political. And there were political risks involved in that, and that were faced. So, I think we all felt it was a really rare opportunity. The first movie that I ever did, based on real events, was Apollo 13. But I've always loved history and journalism. I mean, I probably would have either become like a history teacher / basketball coach in a high school somewhere. Or
thank goodness you didn't.
Well, thank you for that. Or maybe a journalist, but I was still afraid of tackling movies based on real events prior to Apollo 13, and I'd been directing quite a while by the time I made that movie, because I felt like it would somehow inhibit creativity or be too limiting in some ways. But I loved that story. I loved that opportunity. So did Brian Grazer. Got into it, had a great life experience, and really learned to love it, and found it was stimulating creatively in a different kind of way, and that I really took to and enjoyed. But the first preview, this was during an era when you would have real sneak previews, where no one knew what the movie was. They would literally buy out a theater, and I mean, all they would do is say sneak preview, and people would come not knowing what the movie was, and you would test the movie. And so for our very first test of Apollo 13, there'd been no advertising, nothing about it whatsoever. They didn't really say what it was. There was no framework. The audience watched the movie. The test was fantastic. It was great. I mean, people really got it. They were emotional. The scores were great. Even then, I already had Final Cut in my career. But I looked at the test scores, and they were just spectacular. There was one poor out of 342 people. There was one poor. So naturally, that was the preview card I had to instantly try to find. So that night, I found it. What was the problem this person had? And I can remember it. 23-year-old Caucasian male, poor, would not recommend it. Just these, dismissive pencil strokes, hardly any real answers. I flipped it over, and finally it said, please comment on the ending. He said, terrible, with an exclamation mark. More Hollywood bullshit, 2 exclamation marks. They would never survive, 3 exclamation marks. And I said, he didn't know. He was a 23-year-old male, he didn't know. I said, that's why you do Apollo 13. That's why you take that story. And I kind of felt that way about 13 Lives.
When I was watching the film, I was struck with the lack of music and emotional moments. There were in a different film, you would have milked the emotion, and you keep it silent.
Well, thanks. I credit the editor, James Wilcox, in many ways with that. Very interesting. But he had this feeling that that the soundscape in general and the sound design should be kind of brave in this way. So it was always an instinct of his, and both the sound design team and the composer, Ben Wallfish, both really bought into that. However, there was a tremendous amount of experimentation going on. Now, the sound design was
it's remarkable.
It was remarkable, and we were all on the same page as to what it would be. They even went into some caves in England with John Valanthan, the Colin Farrell character, because he didn't get to go on location. And I said, well, maybe John would take us into a cave and you could really record the real thing. And he did. And so we did all that. Great design stuff. Great work. Great team. Nominated many times. A remarkable team. Ben, the music was a huge challenge because it was one of these that was like so hard to temp. And that's really scary when you can't really find music. I mean, we would try horror music in places because I kept saying this is a little bit like a haunted house.
Going into the cave is like a haunted mansion.
You know, yeah. And I wanted to convey that in certain times, and then other times it was more, you know, about the tempo and the pace, or you know, and Ben worked so hard because, again, the temp was just not offering much in the way of clues. And, you know, we sort of did our best with it, but we always knew this is really placeholder stuff. We need to be more imaginative, more interesting. But and even, there were even places where we temped with music, and ultimately we took it out because Ben was open to creating these spaces and these gaps, and he really bought into that as a principle. Most great composers are kind of happy when there's some, because this could have been wall to wall, which would have been quite an undertaking. But I'm being a little bit glib. He understood that there was real power, that it would only increase the value of the music in places if its absence could actually be almost part of the soundscape.
Mm-hmm. And Molly Hughes, the production designer, to explain to everybody, the caves, all the shooting that you see in the caves, that was done, caves were built. They were not shot on location. The caves were built.
100%.
And building a cave is not it's a difficult thing to recreate a cave.
It is so difficult and so full of little traps. And Molly, who is fairly new as a production designer. I worked with her on Hillbilly Elegy, and she's done a few films. But she's American, but she actually moved to England and trained as under the great production designer Stuart from all the Harry Potter movies. I'm just forgetting his last name. Craig, was it? Stuart Craig. I believe so. Yeah, thank you. Brilliant guy, and she worked with him on all those movies. So she really understands how to tackle big, difficult jobs. But she has great taste, you know, a great storyteller, good story mind, and tremendous attention to detail. And so she had two huge challenges. One is to somehow get that granular detail so that the props were like characters in the movie, you know, and that's not just up to the property person. That also lands in the lap of the production designer to set that standard. She did all of that, helped us recreate all of that. She's incredibly thorough. She's there on the set every day, even talking about background extras who are clashing, or is that, you know, do they look good? I mean, she's really involved in the look. But those caves were a huge challenge, and it was about not only designing. We got some schematics from, I guess we can say that Nat Geo. We've done a lot of work at Nat Geo, and they'd done a documentary about it, even before their larger documentary, The Rescue, which is great,
yeah.
by the
Jimmy
way.
Chin.
Yeah, I didn't see it until we were well into post-production, but great movie. But they did like a 1 hour in their series about deep oceans or something like that on the subject, and they gave us some of those schematics. That was helpful. But I then got Molly together with and her construction coordinator with the divers to go through those schematics and say, now where were all the most dangerous points, the most problematic places, because that's what we're going to replicate over and over again. We had to combine some of the problems because we couldn't build every dangerous point in the cave. We built 7 sections of the cave, including Chamber 1 and Chamber 9 where the boys were, and then all of those tunnels. And she modeled them. She had them modeled so that we could, you know, I could look at them and we could break down the storyboards that I'd been working on, and we could decide where certain key moments were going to play and how we could sometimes use the same cave piece to be more than one problem area, and you know, and it was incredibly thorough. And so then it was about building it to scale. But as they were beginning to build the framework, she had the painters, you know, trying to cast the stalactite pieces and the wall pieces and already began painting and highlighting and working with the materials to get the right level of gloss or dullness. And at a certain point, we actually had the real Rick Stanton and Jason Mallinson with us, and they were blown away. It was such a fantastic day when we showed them the cave walls. Not everything was done, but we were well down the road, and then we sank them into the tanks that we built. We built six different tanks, I think, 5 or 6, so that we could control them and the water environment and for health reasons and other reasons, and safety. Dropped them in, and then the guys were beginning to teach the actors, how to cave dive, and but they were also checking out these sets for us, and they just said, "You've got it. This is what it looks like."
Yeah, go ahead.
The challenge was the murk, because in reality they can't really see much at all. For much of it, he said it's like driving in the mountains, going through a cloud. So you'll see a little, and then nothing, and then quite a lot, and then nothing, and it's constantly shifting because of the current in the cave. But at times it's 0. But we can't do 0. So we worked out something with our visual effects people. So we had, a modicum of murk just to give it texture and have movement around the actors. But we developed 3 stages of murkiness that we could then dial in to on a shot-by-shot basis, so that an audience could actually see what was going on, but somehow still feel, how challenging the vision could be.
Which leads me to the next question, the fact that underwater photography is difficult. And, tell us about working with your DP, different DP for the underwater.
Yeah, well, it's the same DP because everybody's reporting to Sayampu, and he was part of the testing, and we tested a lot. But we brought in a guy named Simon Christides, and another guy named Andrew Rollins, who I'd worked with as a camera operator, who's become a good DP himself. He was the DP of the 2nd unit. So these 3 were working constantly trying to figure out how to shoot it. And we started shooting underwater in the tanks. We get some little cave pieces and begin trying to light it. At first we thought only the headlamps, but you couldn't see enough. And it would just flare everything out, which is fine, but we couldn't get enough detail. Then we tried lighting. It looked like a movie, and did not have that same feeling that you get when you go on YouTube. By the way, go on YouTube and just type in sump diving, because that's what this is really called, and you'll see it looks kind of like this. But the way the light bounces around in there and all that, but you could pick up on the highlights. But we wanted to be able to see. Then we wanted to be able to see the eyes. So we tried lights inside the mask, but that looked phony. Couldn't do that. So then it was about a camera operator perhaps having a light that he could dial up and down so it wouldn't get ever too bright, so you wouldn't notice a source light. And then the final trick that came in was, this is thank you to digital technology, because we wound up putting fluorescents building them into the cave in various places, and then having them on a rheostat so that you could dial them up and dial them down, so that a gaffer was doing that, and just to give us a little fill light in these very, very tight spaces. And then in the places where we would catch an edge of it, we would just digitally remove that, and that was a relief, made that possible. So they had to invent a way to shoot in these tight spaces, because it's one thing to build lights into a larger cavern, a larger cave. It's another thing where you're seeing everything, we built in some little portals and some slits in some places where the Simon Christides could swim along with them. The other thing that we found is that the actors, did all the diving because they learned it, and they wanted to do it because it's a technique. They didn't want to trust. They didn't, frankly, want to trust stunt people to deliver what they now knew they could deliver. And that meant scheduling them in ways where, and they volunteered for this. It's another version of volunteerism. You know, terrible hours, extended days, working weekends, and all that stuff. And then we would coordinate so that I could go over with them, and we'd do the Saturday and the Sunday with the second unit, and juggle their schedules around. And but they wound up doing everything, which gave me a tremendous amount of freedom in terms of letting shots develop, and you'd sort of realize, oh, it's them. Oh yeah, that's Rick, that's John, that's Jason. They all did it. They all rose to that occasion. But they also got to be so good that I saw some of our stunt guys swimming around with an iPhone, photographing, and then I said, I wonder if can the actors do that? And they said, yeah, and they started swimming around with the iPhone. I said, could they do it with a grown-up camera? And some of the greatest shots are selfie cam. It's literally them going in and either photographing themselves or following. Some of those POVs are actually operated by Colin or Vigo or you know, and just following the other diver through into these really tight areas where you just could not get a camera operator in there as well.
Wow. You mentioned James Wilcox, the editor. This story has different points of view. Yeah. And how challenging was the editing process? I love the water engineer that comes in,
yeah.
You know, that part of the story.
I love that part of the story, too.
Balancing...
I love the old guy who splits the bamboo. But I learned that from an interview with the real Tanat. So that's like the kind of thing that was never really in the script. I saw these pictures and I said, what is this bamboo? And he says, oh, well, we ran out of pipe. Well, what do you mean you ran out of pipe? Well, we did, and then they just told, some of the locals, just told us that we could split the pipe, and we'd never thought of that, split the bamboo.
So it wasn't in the script, it was just added after you find out.
Yeah, and there was a lot of that kind of thing. But again, I keep going back to Bill Nicholson's fundamental framing of the story, which never really altered very much. I overshot because there was a lot of detail and a lot of actors, and almost as dramatically as I overshot Apollo 13, believing that this would be a post-production movie, that our job was to go out there and gather as much detail as we possibly could, following the shape of a fairly tight screenplay. But I kept building, developing, finding, and then I believed that I wanted a kind of density in the scene work. There's one other thing that we did that Molly was a part of, but so was Bill Connor, who's credited as a producer, but he was also the first AD on the movie. And that were these we called them vignettes, but we would, in real detail, like we would get 50 to 100 background people and train them to actually, do things like unroll the hose or charge it with water, deal with the pumps and all that stuff, so that all of those got planned well in advance and based, again, on that research footage that was rolling constantly in the production office. We would say, we need that bit. We need, what scene can that go in? And we'd have these sort of endless meetings, like, where could we feature that within a scene in a way that would seem, sort of throwaway, but in fact, just create that atmosphere, create that sense of constant work and the tension that, that goes with that. So, we did all that, and it was an incredibly intense post-production period, a period of ongoing discovery, collapsing scenes, figuring out, what do we really need from our broadcasters. Some of that could be done in post-production. Some things were sort of, jerry-rigged and reshaped, and then post-production dialogue put in. So it was, and you had to, I was screening the movie from the point where, it was much, much longer than this, but just so that I could connect, and I had done this with Apollo and other movies as well. I screen a lot. I screen a lot to try to understand, really what's being conveyed, what's landing, what isn't, so we sort of exhausted. We had to do all the post-production in England because it was an English co-production and it was tax purposes and whatnot.
And Wilcox was a finding the rhythm of all the different strains of the story.
James comes largely out of TV and music. He was doing a lot of, he used to work for VH1 quite a bit. And he began in news as a news editor. And so he's tremendous with performance and nuance. But, and so it was a lot about just building around the great moments, which is the way I like to stage and shoot anyway. But James is, has a great instinct for that. And that's what this process was all about.
Tell me a little bit about the casting, the fact that the young kids,
Weren't actors?
weren't actors.
Yeah. One kid had done a little bit of acting. He was from Bangkok. The youngest one, Chai, and the one with the pink mask. Yeah. And all the other kids were from the north because we needed that dialect. Any kid who had to speak, we just need to cast from the north because that dialect is very difficult. You couldn't expect to coach it into a non-actor. And so none of them had acted. But one of those two co-producers is this 31-year-old writer-director. He's also a teacher. He was incredible with him. And I immediately began to see what this rapport was all about. It started when they were, when they were still in quarantine. And he began conducting almost like a camp. He was really giving them, he was really putting them through acting exercises and getting them acquainted with the script and starting to connect and relate to the characters. And I didn't cast them with every specific character in mind. I just cast great kids because these were sort of amalgam characters anyway, and all based on the observations of the divers and other people that we talked to. So in compressing sort of, a lot of nuances and details into a handful of characters, I waited until I began to understand the natural kind of qualities of the kids we brought. We brought because they auditioned and we felt like they could act, and Billy was there in Thailand with them. And again, I was able to sort of put him to work, and he became, the conduit. He became sort of their director in a way. I would, once they got out of quarantine, then they kept rehearsing for the 2 weeks. I'd come through and spend an hour and a half with them each day, staging and restaging and sort of reinforcing ideas that I thought were important, but also encouraging them to ad lib and talking to Billy about, let's make sure this language is contemporary and that these are real, these are 13, 14-year-old boys. Let's, it doesn't have to be nice all the time. Let's make it real. And they understood. And by the first day of shooting, and the very first thing that we shot was Viggo and Colin finding them in the cave. And it was a challenging first thing, but for logistical reasons, we had to do that first. And Viggo and Colin were so grateful because the kids were just in it. They were in the headspace. James, the coach, James Tiradon plays the coach. He's a well-regarded young actor there, award-winning and also a music star, but he was so dedicated to this and leading these kids. None of the kids could lose weight. We couldn't ask them to do that. He did. So no digital tweaking of the cheeks or chest cavity for him. He did it all on his own. We did do some of that for the kids just to make them look a little, a little hungrier. But James was fantastic with these kids and actually went and spent time at a monastery to sort of relearn again, because the coach had actually been to a monastery for about a year, and to learn again about meditation and so forth. And he taught the boys how to meditate, just like the character does in the movie. But they would, to get ready, if they were anxious and to be calm on that first day, I saw them off to the side of the set, and James and Billy and the boys were all meditating before the first shot. So they were kind of getting into that space. And the actors could feel it. Colin and Viggo could just feel it. And there was never a false moment with those boys. I mean, it was very little directing for me from that point on, other than staging and under, sort of refining certain moments and things like that. It was just kind of breathtaking.
And did the young boys knew who you were?
I don't think so, no. No, just the director.
You didn't bring out the
boss,
Oscar and say, you know, beautiful mind?
I don't know, I never asked him.
You alluded to the fact, you mentioned casually about quarantine and the fact that you guys shot in Australia. Can you explain?
Yeah, well, we got, MGM wanted the movie. We took it around. There were several companies interested. MGM really supported it, and my approach to it. I told them there was going to be more Thai in the movie than was reflected in the script. I don't think anybody, even I didn't necessarily think the first 9 minutes would be Thai. But I definitely knew I never wanted to force English into a scene that ought to have been in Thai, And they were very supportive of all of that and the movie. And then COVID hit. And then, so at that point, everything at Imagine Entertainment and around the business just stopped for a while, as we all know. And then we were able to move back into a kind of a soft pre-production. And then it was a matter of kind of seeing, by then we figured out where we would shoot, knowing that Thailand was going to be probably problematic. It turned out to be very problematic because at the time we were shooting, it was shut down, completely shut down. But Queensland had opened up, and fortunately, Sayampu and Lek and others had helped us find, look around the world at where else we could shoot. And Queensland, the topography and worked not just as a place where we could build the base camp and do our warehouses, but also the most of the mountain area that we shot, with the rain and the building the dams and all of that stuff, we were able to do in Queensland. We wound up doing a remote unit in post-production that was about a week or 10 days of sort of just drones getting shots of the mountains and the rice fields and that sort of thing, and then a week of scenes. And by then I directed the actors, so I could do it remotely. And those were scenes like finding the villager in the village, or scenes in the town. Parents are driving through the town, scenes around the rice fields, and things like that. And so it was less than ideal, but we navigated it. We got very lucky with Queensland. At that point, the borders were all blocked. You couldn't go sort of region to region, but within Queensland, not one person got sick. We were testing constantly, but we were just so fortunate.
Yeah. And last, tell us about working with Viggo, Joel, Edgerton, and Colin.
Everybody just sort of checked their careerist thinking at the door and just wanted to tell the story for like the reason you started off the interview about. They wanted to make this point. This film makes a point. It brings out about what people at their best can actually look like, what can be achieved when you put politics and other things aside and just work together to solve a problem. If Thailand could achieve that for these boys, what else could be achieved around the world if people could work together that way? That's really what they wanted to do. And it was a good script Bill wrote, and it's a tremendous story. And Viggo's also a director, and was very interested in.
And so is Joel too.
Yeah, and Joel, and a good writer too, and did a nice job with his character. Again, didn't rewrite it per se, but just fleshed it out in a way. It just made everything. He was the one. He and Tom Bateman and the Thais were the only ones who got to sort of work in their own accent, and that was nice for them. Viggo was very concerned about the accent, and actually said, "I won't do it if Rick Stanton can't actually come and be with me, and I just can't take on the challenge without him." And Rick is retired and a retired firefighter. And he agreed to come and be our technical advisor. Jason Mallinson joined him as well, both incredibly valuable. Sometimes actors are intimidated by that, but in this case, Viggo, again, felt a tremendous responsibility to really get that accent right, but also the behavior, the tone. And as they're hanging around being schooled, they're also learning a hell of a lot about the mindset of this particular breed of individual takes on that kind of activity, and also feeding me a lot of information and a lot of details, about the process, which again I felt if we photographed it right, if we laid it out properly, that those could be those little surprises and those little nuggets that could keep pulling an audience through this, because it is a movie, a movie version of a story, especially having now made some documentaries. I understand that the sort of the compact you have with your audience, the expectation is they're different. And with the documentary, you engage the mind, you engage the heart, you want to pack it with as much detail and information as possible, and present it. But it's okay to do interviews. It's okay to do voiceover. It's okay to really explain things, because it is kind of a lecture. It's kind of an explanation of something that unfolded. Well, with a movie, it's still an entertainment. It's there to engage, to immerse, to transport, to create, and to create something, a feeling, a reaction. And my way of saying it is that that we needed to convey the facts and the truth. We needed to engage mind and heart, but we also needed to engage the nervous system. And so I hope the film for audience members does that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. This is the movie we needed, at a time like this, to be told that we need to work together, that we need to stop fighting against each other and work for a common goal. Sure. And you did a fantastic job.
Well, thank you. Thanks for coming and seeing it.
Thank you.
On screen. I really appreciate it.